Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Father Brown Watched from Afar, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. Father Brown watched the murder. She screamed once, then silence, and from behind the cracked window pane of St. Agnes's rectory, Father Brown did not move. It was not that he could not help, it was that he dared not. The rain had fallen for hours, thick and smothering, the kind that seemed to hush the entire world into complicity. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, down by the old stone well, a woman had just been killed, and Father Brown had seen it. Every motion, every silent beat of it. And still, he had not stepped outside. His hands, still gloved from the cold, trembled slightly, but his eyes, they were dry, wide, focused. This was no ordinary crime. This was no act of impulse or rage. This had been performed. He reached for his umbrella but paused. The image repeated in his mind. Again, again, again. A figure cloaked in a waxed overcoat. The way they had led the woman through the trees. The moment she turned, her mouth formed the shape of recognition. And then, not resistance, resignation. I should have known, Father Brown whispered to no one. The body had not yet been found, and yet he knew where it was. More chillingly, he knew who would find it, who was meant to find it. He stepped out at last, walking slowly toward the path that curved around the parish cemetery. The trees bent low over the trail, branches clutching at his coat, like skeletal hands. In the distance, the sound of a dog barked, once sharply, as though startled into existence. Father Brown's breath fogged the air as he reached the clearing. There was no body, just a necklace, half buried in mud, a pendant shaped like a chalice. She had worn it always. He didn't pick it up. He turned instead to the ancient chapel that stood beyond the yew trees. There, inside the vestry, someone would be waiting. Not to confess, not to repent, but to explain, as if murder was something that could be reasoned with. But when he entered, the chapel was empty, completely. No candles lit, no prayer books displaced, only a faint scent of myrrh and, oddly, ink. He approached the altar. A single envelope sat upon the cloth. His name was scrawled across the front in an unsteady hand. To the priest who knows. He opened it. Inside was no letter, just a torn page from the parish's own Book of Saints, ripped precisely, carefully, deliberately. The saint depicted Saint Dymphna, protector of the mentally tormented. On the back, in red ink, "You saw, but did you understand?" Father Brown closed his eyes for a moment. His heart thudded, not from fear, but anticipation. He had been drawn into a game, one that had been prepared in advance, long in advance. Outside, the rain fell harder now, hammering the chapel roof like impatient fists. He returned to the rectory and made a phone call. Not to the police, not yet. He called Miss Mary Dunlow, the housekeeper. "Mary," he said calmly, "I need you to lock every window in the presbytery, and tell no one what I'm about to ask." There was silence on the other end. "Father, what's happened?" "She's dead, Mary," he said softly. "But it's not her death that troubles me. It's what she whispered when she saw who it was. Mary gasped. You heard her? I read her lips, he replied, lowering his voice, and she said, but it was supposed to be him. The doorbell rang. He hung up. Outside the rectory stood Constable Neville, pale, drenched, and visibly shaking. Not from cold. There's Father, you'll want to come with me. He did not ask why. He already knew. They followed the narrow trail behind the churchyard until they reached the old gardener's shed, disused and rotting. The door had been broken open. Inside was a wooden chair, and beside it, an open journal. One Father Brown recognized. It belonged to Catherine Morley, the woman who had just died. But she had not written in it. Each page, each line had been overwritten with a single sentence. He watched me. He knew. Over and over, in smaller script, one last line at the bottom. So, now he must choose. Father Brown, the constable asked quietly. I saw her die, the priest said flatly. But I fear that's not the most disturbing part. The constable blinked. What do you mean? She let it happen. They left the shed. The journal remained behind. That night, Father Brown could not sleep. The rain had stopped, but the silence was worse. His dreams were not of Catherine's death, but of her eyes, not wide in terror, but calm, too calm, as though she had known this moment would come. He woke before dawn and entered the library. Every document, every record he had from the last 3 months, he pulled and laid across the floor. Patterns emerged, letters she had written but never sent, confessionals she had entered, but not on her own behalf, names she mentioned, but only once, like whispers in a longer sentence. 3 people, all connected, all hiding something. He scribbled their names on a sheet. Thomas Rivington, the local undertaker who always seemed too quick to appear at the scene. 2 dots, Dr. Isabel March, the village physician with a spotless record, and an obsession with psychiatric disorders. 3 dots, Andrew Hale, a theology student turned recluse who once preached outside the chapel until the bishop banned him. Each had seen Catherine in the last week of her life. Each, Father Brown believed, had confessed to her something unspeakable. But it was her who ended up dead. The mystery deepened, not with the question of who killed Catherine, but why she allowed it. And the deeper he looked, the more twisted the trail became. In the doctor's office, Father Brown found a framed certificate from a psychiatric institute, signed by none other than Catherine Morley. She had once been an administrator at a facility for the criminally insane, and beside it, a photograph of 6 patients. One face had been scratched out, violently. In Rivington's files, he discovered burial permits going back 20 years. But 2 of the permits had the same name, one dated 1994, the other 2003. Impossible, unless someone had died twice or pretended to. At Hale's cabin, he found notebooks, religious ramblings, prophecies, visions. But one phrase repeated on every cover: the silent priest must fall. The priest, silent, watching. Father Brown set down the notebooks and turned to leave, only to stop. Hanging on the back wall was a coat, a waxed overcoat, still wet. He reached out and touched it. It was not his size, not Hale's either. Then whose? A knock at the cabin door froze him in place. He opened it slowly. Catherine Morley stood there, alive, soaking wet, shivering, eyes wide, mouth open. No, Father Brown whispered. You're... She stepped inside. You weren't supposed to see it. That's why they chose you." He backed away. "You were dead." "I saw." She collapsed, breathing, but barely. Her coat unbuttoned, revealing deep cuts across her ribs. "She told me what to do," she rasped. "She said if I didn't, they'd kill the priest." Father Brown knelt beside her. "Who told you?" Her eyes fluttered. "She wore a veil. Said you would understand. Said you watched everything, but noticed nothing." Then she passed out, and in that moment, Father Brown knew. He rose, and from his coat, removed a letter he had received 3 days earlier. Anonymous, postmarked from another village. Only 4 words were written inside. "Watch, but do not interfere." It hadn't been a warning. It had been instructions. He had obeyed, and in doing so, he had become part of something ancient, dark, ritualistic, something that stretched far beyond one village, one death. Catherine was never the victim, and neither was he. He dialed the bishop. "I need access to the sealed records." There was a pause. "Which ones?" "St. Dymphna Parish. All files between 1994 and 1998. Silence. "Father, those were destroyed." "No," he said coldly. "They were hidden. And I know who hid them." That night, he returned to the chapel. The envelope had disappeared, but something had been left behind in its place. A photograph. Himself, watching from the window, the moment before she died. The angle of the photo meant one thing. Someone had been watching him, watching her, and now they wanted him to know it. His breath caught. A whisper echoed behind him. "The second murder will be harder to watch." He spun around. No one, only the sound of his own heartbeat. And one final realization. He hadn't failed to act. He'd been allowed to watch, like a priest standing behind the veil, bearing witness, but never interfering. Only now, someone had moved the veil, and in that space, beyond understanding, Father Brown finally whispered, "I know who did it." He looked up at the crucifix on the wall. Chapter 2. Someone knew Father Brown was watching. The envelope was addressed to Father Brown, but inside was a photo of himself, asleep. He stared at it for a long time, his fingers motionless, his mind calculating something far more terrifying than the image itself. It had been taken the night before, the angle, from the window facing his bed. Someone had been in his room, watching him, breathing the same air he breathed. And now they wanted him to know it. There was no note, no threat, only a smudge of ash on the corner of the photograph and an indentation on the back where someone had pressed hard with a pen, but never written. It was 3:07 a.m. He did not go back to sleep. That same day, the villagers woke to another shock. The church bell rang twice before sunrise, though no one had pulled the rope. The groundskeeper, Elias Pratt, claimed he had heard footsteps in the belfry, but when he investigated, the room was empty, except for an open hymnal turned to a song that hadn't been sung in over 50 years, "God Sees Even in Shadow." By noon, 3 parishioners had reported seeing a figure outside the chapel the night before, wearing what looked like a priest's cassock, but Father Brown had been in his quarters all evening, speaking privately with Mary Dunlow, the housekeeper. Something had begun, but unlike all the other times, this was not a puzzle to solve. This was a trap being set. He returned to his desk and opened his diary. 2 pages were missing, torn out cleanly. He had not done it. Whoever had knew which entries to remove. And worse, they knew what was written on them, because those were the nights he had begun to suspect that Catherine Morley hadn't died. She had been used, by whom he hadn't yet determined. But now, someone else knew that he knew. He lit a candle and whispered aloud, "They're not just watching, they're responding." He stepped outside, walking slowly past the graves in the old cemetery. Something glinted between the weeds near Catherine's headstone. He knelt, a shard of mirror, sharp, planted there, facing the rectory window. It hadn't just reflected sunlight, it had reflected him. Someone had been watching him watch himself. He stood abruptly. His eyes scanned the tree line, the upper windows of the chapel, the shadows between tombs. Nothing. Yet, later that evening, he received an unexpected visitor, Dr. Isabel March, the local physician. "I came," she said, her voice taut, "because someone left this in my mailbox." She handed him a small, hand-carved cross. At first, he didn't understand, until he turned it over. Engraved in the wood were the words, "One of you will lie. One of you will die." Father Brown exhaled slowly. "And the third?" "There was no third message," she said, pale now. "Just that, and this." She handed him a paper napkin. On it was drawn a map of the parish grounds, but upside down, turned as though viewed from behind or above. He studied it in silence. "Do you see something?" she asked. "Yes," he said quietly. "I see that whoever drew this was standing where Catherine was killed." Her hand gripped the edge of the desk. "But she died outside the parish by the well." "No," he said. "That's what we were meant to believe. She was moved." The pieces were moving faster now. He returned to the bell tower that night, alone. Climbing the wooden stairs slowly, he felt the weight of centuries pressing down on each step. At the top, moonlight filtered through the slats. And then he saw it. Etched into the wood behind the bell was a single line. "The bell tolls when you sleep." He turned around, expecting someone, but there was only the wind. Then something else caught his eye. In the dust, a boot print. Not his, not Elias Pratt's. He knelt and examined it. Narrow, deep, female. He descended the stairs faster than he had climbed. Them. The air was colder than it should have been. His breath fogged as he reached the base of the tower. There, pinned to the wooden door, was the second photograph. This time, it showed Father Brown standing at the graveyard that morning, kneeling before Catherine's tomb. The angle, from inside the chapel. His mind reeled. Each image was showing him in reverse. Never when he was moving, always when he was still. Someone had been cataloguing him, like an exhibit. He returned to his study, locked the door, and pulled the curtain tight. It would do no good, but it made the illusion of control feel real. He spread the photographs on his desk. There was a pattern, the time, the position, the distance, all precisely chosen. Then he noticed it. Each image had been taken at 3:07 a.m., except the one from the graveyard. That one was marked 6:14 a.m. He stared. His heart skipped. 6:14. Genesis 6:14. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. It was a reference, biblical, but why? He opened his old annotated Bible and flipped to the verse. Beneath the original line, in his own handwriting, was a note from years ago. The world watches while the righteous prepare for a flood of silence. He had written that during a retreat. He had forgotten it entirely, but someone hadn't. The next day, Father Brown walked to the abandoned vestry building. the one sealed off for renovations for over 2 years. No one entered anymore, or so they thought. Inside, it smelled of old incense and mold. The pews were cracked, the walls damp, but someone had been using it. He found the floor swept, a small lantern still warm, and a single item placed carefully on the altar. A torn collar, a priest's collar, not his, but someone wanted him to believe it was. Suddenly he heard a door close, very softly, somewhere behind the apse. He followed the sound, but as he reached the far hallway, he froze. There was a child's voice, singing, faint, echoing, a lullaby, a song no child should know. It was the hymn from the bell tower. God sees even in shadow. He followed the sound to a closet door. The singing stopped. He opened it, empty, except for one thing, a photograph of himself, standing right there. Taken seconds before, he dropped it. It fluttered to the floor. On the back, scrawled in black ink, "Now you understand. Now you're part of it." That night, Father Brown sat alone in the chapel. The wind had stopped. Everything was still. He began to write a letter, then stopped midway through the sentence. His hand trembled, because on the blank side of the page, faintly appearing under the flicker of candlelight, were words, not in his handwriting. "We knew you would watch, but we never expected you to see." Suddenly, the chapel lights flickered and died. A shadow passed across the stained glass window. He didn't turn around. "I know you're there," he said, quietly. No answer. Only a long, slow exhale. And then, footsteps. Fading, he rose, turned, and found no one. But beneath the pew, where he had been sitting, was a book. His book, his diary. The pages that had been missing were now returned. He opened them. But the words were gone, replaced by sketches of himself in various locations across the village, always from behind, always from above, always watching. And at the bottom of each page, "So, who is watching? You?" Father Brown stood in the center of the chapel and whispered, "You want me to question what I know." He looked toward the crucifix above the altar. "But I already have." There was no answer, only the sound of something small hitting the floor. He knelt. It was a key. Rusty. Ancient. Attached to a tag. Confessional. East Wing. Midnight. The confessional had been sealed for a decade. No one used it. No one even went near it. Too much mold. Too many memories. At midnight, he opened it and found one thing, a mirror. On the glass, words etched backward. "You see the killer every day." He stepped back. Behind him, in the darkness, something moved, and a voice, not human, not entirely, whispered, "Someone knew you were watching, Father, because they've been watching longer." And then silence. No scream, no footstep, just silence. Like something ancient had turned away again. He clutched the collar in his coat pocket and said softly, "I know who did it." Then he turned to the shadows and added, Chapter 3. The body moved before dawn. The corpse was cold, the eyes wide open, and yet just before sunrise, someone saw it stand up and walk into the woods. Father Brown had barely opened his eyes when the knock came, slow, deliberate, and entirely wrong for a sleepy village at 4:47 a.m. It was Constable Neville, face as pale as frost. "Father, the body, it's gone. Not stolen, not tampered with. Gone." Catherine Morley's grave had been freshly dug the previous evening and filled by Elias the gravedigger under his own watch. Father Brown had stood over the coffin before it was lowered. He had said the rites. He had watched the dirt fall. And yet now, as he stood at the edge of the burial site, there was no sign she had ever been buried at all. The earth was flattened, undisturbed. The crucifix marker, missing. No mound, no footprints, only an overturned candle holder a few paces to the right, melted into the ground as if someone, or something, had spent hours there, watching. Father Brown crouched low. The candle wax had not yet cooled fully. Someone had been there recently, possibly still was. He rose and scanned the trees at the far edge of the cemetery. Then he saw it, a glint, a flicker, a shape, a figure, standing motionless beneath the willow trees that bordered the estate's edge. The sun had not yet risen, but there was enough light to see. Bare feet, a long black dress, pale fingers clasped in prayer, and a face hidden by a bridal veil. Father Brown did not move, nor did she. They simply watched one another. Then slowly, the figure turned and walked deeper into the woods, silent as vapor, disappearing behind the thorn bushes as if she had melted into them. By the time Constable Neville returned with a lantern and Elias, the figure was gone. But something else had appeared. On the bench nearest the chapel door, folded precisely, was a priest's stole. Crimson, with a small smear of blood on one end. Father Brown reached for it and paused. The stain had not dried. It was warm. That was when he noticed the time carved into the wood beneath the bench. 5:08 a.m. The very minute he had seen the veiled woman in the trees. He turned to Neville and said quietly, "I don't think the body was moved. I think it never rested at all." Back inside the chapel, he opened Catherine Morley's parish file. It was empty. Every note, every form, every confession record, gone, replaced by a single handwritten slip folded 6 times. It read, "She was buried twice, but mourned once." Mary Dunlow arrived just before 6, with trembling hands and news worse than anything so far. "Father," she whispered, "we heard someone in the vestry last night." "Who is we?" he asked. "The children from the choir. They were rehearsing late. They said they heard weeping, and a voice saying, 'I forgive you. I forgive you. I forgive you,' over and over. But when they looked, the vestry door was locked from the inside." Father Brown said nothing. He simply walked to the vestry himself. The key turned easily. Inside, everything was perfectly still. But the air, it was damp and cold, and beneath the wooden floorboards, one had been pried loose. Inside the hidden space was a rosary, blackened, melted, and beneath it, a small porcelain hand. Just the hand, from a statue. The fingers had been deliberately snapped off, except one, which pointed straight up. He held the hand carefully and said to himself, "She was trying to tell us something." He walked back to the grave site. And then he noticed it. The tree beside Catherine's plot had fresh sap along one side, smudged across the bark. Not natural, human-made, a kind of resin or paste used by preservationists. He knelt beside it, brushed away the leaves, and found 3 long lines drawn into the dirt. A symbol, 3 vertical slashes, and then 1 long diagonal through all of them. Slashed confessions, redacted truths. He took the porcelain hand from his coat and pressed it into the soil beside the lines. A perfect fit. Whoever had placed the statue fragment there had also marked the tree. That meant Catherine had been here. after she was supposed to be dead, he returned to the rectory and lit every candle he had. Then he opened the parish registry, cross-referenced every burial, every name associated with the vestry in the last 15 years. One name repeated, Vivian March, the doctor's sister. But Vivian had been dead for 10 years, or so they believed. He flipped to the last entry. There, in faint ink, the last confession Catherine ever made. It was only 3 words. Vivian never died. The ink had bled. Someone had tried to erase it. But the impression remained. So did the fear. That night, Father Brown didn't sleep. At 2:13 a.m., the chapel bells rang once. He dressed silently, took a lantern, and followed the sound. Not to the bell tower, but to the crypt below the altar. The door was ajar. No one had the key. Not even him. Inside, the cold was like ice. He held the lantern low and saw that the father's coffin, untouched for nearly a century, was open. And inside was not bones, not dust. Inside was a note, pinned to the velvet lining. I borrowed this space. She needed rest. The night is long. The handwriting was identical to Catherine Morley's. He turned, and in the farthest corner of the crypt saw something carved into the wall. A date, tomorrow, and beneath it, a name, his own. No title, no father, just Brown. The finality of it chilled him to his soul. He climbed out of the crypt and sealed the door himself. But the wind had changed. It carried with it a smell, wax and blood and lilies, the funeral bouquet. Someone had moved the flowers from Catherine's grave to his door. And on the ribbon was written, "Forgiveness is for the silent." At 3:33 a.m., he returned to the chapel. The pews were not empty. Someone was sitting in the second row, the veiled figure, still, waiting. He approached. She didn't move. Then he whispered, "Vivian?" The head tilted. Not yes, not no, just slightly, like listening. And then the figure said, in Catherine's voice, "She only moves the dead," and vanished. Not walked out, not fled. Gone, as if pulled from the world by something unseen. In her place, her veil. Inside it, a newspaper clipping from 1993. Local woman declared dead in arson attack. No remains found. Vivian March. The body had never been recovered because it had never been there. He fell to his knees and said aloud, "You used Catherine. You used me. And now you want my silence." He heard it then. A voice whispered through every wall of the church. "Before the sun rises, another grave will open. You decide whose." He looked at the veil, at the wax-stained rosary, at the grave that wasn't. And then, in a tone he hadn't used since his youth, Father Brown whispered, "I know who did it." He closed his eyes. Chapter 4. He saw everything from afar. The man who'd been dead for a week appeared in the window across from Father Brown and nodded at him. It was a small thing, a gesture so impossibly ordinary that its horror didn't register for a full 5 seconds. Then Father Brown dropped the book he was holding. He stood slowly, heart clenching. The window was across the lane, part of the long-abandoned Durnley house, boarded up for years. Yet there he was, Edward Fielding, pale, expressionless, nodding, and then gone. Edward had been buried 6 days ago, the ceremony quiet, rushed, and odd. No family, no eulogy, no death certificate shown. Just the parish's word that he'd passed of natural causes. Father Brown hadn't seen the body. The coffin was closed. Now it was clear that someone else had been watching. Maybe for weeks. Maybe since before Edward's supposed death. The room in which Edward had appeared was on the 3rd floor, once a study, later sealed after the fire in 1931. No lights had worked there in decades, and yet the silhouette had stood bathed in faint yellow glow, the window behind him glimmering softly, like someone had lit a candle from within the house itself. He crossed the lane, cautious, but not afraid. The lock on the Durnley gate had been broken recently, the iron clasp twisted out of shape rather than picked. Inside, the air smelled like forgotten time. Dust, mold, and something metallic. He stepped carefully through the sitting room, boots echoing off the cracked tiles. When he reached the stairs, he stopped. There were muddy footprints, bare, leading up, still wet. He followed them. At the 3rd floor landing, every door was shut, except one. The study. The door creaked open with a sound like a scream trapped in slow motion. The room was dark now, no candlelight, no warmth, just the sharp scent of wax and the faint outline of a chair beside the window. An old, wooden rocker turned to face the garden, empty, but the candle, it still burned. A single stub on the windowsill, flickering weakly, dripping wax into an open book that lay beneath it. He approached slowly. The book was not just open, it was filled with photographs, all of him. Father Brown, walking, preaching, speaking to parishioners, standing at graves, always unaware, always seen from a distance. One photo stopped his breath. It was from the previous morning. He had been standing in his own rectory window, holding the Bible and whispering a line to himself. "We are not made to see all things." But the photo captured that exact moment, word for word, from across the lane, meaning someone had been watching him from here. He turned the page. A second book lay beneath the first, bound in black leather, a journal. He opened it. Inside, a single sentence, repeated for 22 pages. He saw everything from afar, over and over, in different inks, different slants of handwriting, but always the same words. And then, the next line, a new phrase, "But one day he'll come too close." He snapped the book shut. On the inside of the back cover was a pressed violet, the same flower placed on Edward Fielding's coffin. He descended the stairs quickly now, mind racing. Who had written those pages? Why was the house still being used? And if Edward was alive, who or what was buried in his place? That evening, Father Brown found himself alone in the chapel, candlelight barely holding back the shadows around the pews. The old bell rang once, not by rope, not by storm, but by purpose. At the back of the chapel, a door creaked open. A boy no older than 10 stepped inside. He looked lost, dazed, eyes glassy. "Father," he said softly, "someone gave me this." He held out a photograph. It was Father Brown, in his study, asleep, and written across the bottom in red ink, "Stop watching or be seen." "Who gave this to you?" Father Brown asked, kneeling beside him. The boy's lips trembled. "The man in the field. He had no eyes." The child passed out in his arms. When the boy was safely returned home, Father Brown sat in his chair and stared at the empty room. He had always believed the danger was in what others were hiding. Now he wondered, was it in what he failed to see? The next morning, the parish woke to find a coffin at the foot of the church, steps identical to Edward Fielding's. Father Brown opened it. Empty. Except for a mirror, and on the glass, scratched with something jagged. He sees everything, but never himself. That night, he walked to the river, where the body had first been found. He brought the journal from Durnley House with him, and burned it, page by page. He dropped the last photo into the flames, and whispered, "This ends now." But when he returned to the chapel, his Bible had been replaced. Not removed, replaced. Same cover, same bookmarks, same ribbon. But inside, every passage had been underlined, all the verses about vision, about blindness, about God seeing from above. And on the final page, a handwritten message. The dead man you saw wasn't Edward, but Edward saw you. That night, Father Brown spoke no prayers. He stared out of the window, to the place where the light had once burned, to the house that now stood still, and just before dawn, one final flicker of light returned to the study across the lane. He did not go to it. He only whispered, "I know who did it." And then, turning from the window, Chapter 5, a killer saw him watching. The killer didn't run when he saw Father Brown watching. He smiled and held up 3 fingers. It was not the act of a man caught. It was the act of someone expecting to be seen, someone who wanted an audience. Father Brown stood frozen behind the curtain of the chapel window, the weight of that silent gesture pressing down like judgment. 3 fingers, not a wave, not a threat, a message, a countdown, or worse, a count already finished. Outside, the fog clung low to the ground, making the churchyard shimmer like a drowning memory. The man, tall, thin, not wearing a coat despite the cold, stepped back into the mist and disappeared behind the lich gate. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew Father Brown had seen. That night, the chapel bells rang 4 times. No one was inside. Father Brown didn't sleep. He sat with his candle burning low, replaying the image in his mind. The smile, the 3 fingers, the unnaturally calm face. There was something disturbingly familiar in the man's stillness, as if it mirrored something in himself. Not just a killer being watched, but a killer watching back. Not with panic or fear, but calculation, intimacy. The smile wasn't just for recognition. It was for acknowledgement. The killer knew who he was smiling at. By morning, it had begun. A note was pinned to the chapel door, written in red ink, each word perfectly centered. 3 deaths, 1 witness. Guess which one you are. Underneath it, a photograph. Grainy, cropped, but unmistakably Father Brown, seated in his confessional, unaware. He removed it carefully and turned it over. Scrawled on the back, "The second has already happened." The bells rang again, just once. Mary Dunlow found the body at midday. Jonathan Greaves, the parish bell ringer, strangled, kneeling, eyes wide open, as if still hearing something only the dead could hear. Its she, left hand, was curled inward, clutching something small, a scrap of paper. Father Brown pried it loose. 1 word. "He's listening." Constable Neville tried to keep order, but fear spread like a disease. Whispers passed from house to house. Who would be next? What did the killer want? Why was Father Brown at the center of it? Because by now, they all knew. He had seen the man and said nothing. Not yet. Inside the rectory, he laid out the timeline. The first death had been passed off as an accident. Caroline Foster drowned in her own bathtub. No water splashed, no struggle marks, just silence, and a faint, unmistakable smell. Lilies, now Greaves, also silent. No broken bones, no sign of intrusion. Only the stillness of a death that looked almost invited. He returned to the confession logs. There had been one note from Caroline, weeks before her death. A name scribbled next to her confession. MD, not a title, a person. Then, in Greaves's notes, MD, again, a pattern. But the parish had no one with those initials, except for one, Michael Deering, a theology student, dismissed 5 years ago for preaching. Something unapproved, something incomplete. His sermons had grown erratic, they said, too specific, too obsessed with divine witness, punishment, and the joy of being seen. And then he vanished. No one had heard from him since, until the man in the fog smiled, held up 3 fingers, and disappeared. Father Brown walked to the old seminary records, dug through dusty boxes until he found Deering's final evaluation, typed on yellow paper, signed by 3 priests, all dead now except one. Father Reynolds, living in seclusion at a nearby monastery. That night, Father Brown visited him. The old man stared at him through eyes full of history. "You've seen him," Reynolds said, before Father Brown could speak. "I think he's watching me," Father Brown replied. "He's not watching," Reynolds whispered. "He's waiting." "For what?" "For you to see him properly." Silence stretched between them. Father Brown spoke carefully. "He smiled at me, held up 3 fingers. 2 are already dead." Reynolds nodded. "He always gives them time to notice, to understand, to confess." "To confess?" Reynolds leaned forward. "He doesn't punish the wicked. He punishes the witnesses, because they saw and did nothing." Father Brown sat back, cold, sinking into his spine. "Why me?" "Because you looked at him, and you didn't scream." He left the monastery under a sky that felt too heavy to be real. Even the stars looked like pinholes stabbed in a coffin lid. Back in Kembleford, the village felt different. Not empty, but watched. Like the killer had infected the space around them with something ancient and invisible. The next morning, another note, pinned to the chapel gate. "One more left, he knows." And beside it, a name, Mary. Dunlow. He ran. He found her sitting in the pews, whispering a prayer she hadn't used in decades. She looked up at him, eyes full of knowing. "I saw him," she said, "before the first murder. I saw him in the garden. But I thought it was just a dream." Father Brown took her hand. "It wasn't." He looked at me like he'd been waiting for me to look back, like I was the one being revealed. He pulled the church curtains closed and locked every door. "You can't be alone. Not now." She nodded, trembling. And that's when the final bell rang. Once. But it came from inside the chapel. They searched every room, every shadow, every crawl space. No sign of him, only one thing left behind. On the altar, a small mirror, cracked, and on the glass, "You saw her. You did nothing." It was Mary's reflection in the center of the web of cracks, but she had never stood in front of that mirror. She backed away slowly, then said quietly, "He wants me to confess, not to sin, but to silence." Father Brown turned the mirror over. Something was etched on the back. A date. Tonight. The clock struck 11. He lit every candle in the chapel, placed Mary at the center, then waited. The wind outside howled like a warning. And then, at exactly midnight, the door creaked open. not violently, calmly, like a man coming home. And there he stood, Michael Deering, older, thinner, pale, but smiling, the same 3 fingers, this time pointed at Father Brown, then himself, then Mary. He spoke a single sentence. "You saw the scream before it came." Father Brown stepped forward. "What do you want?" "I want you to see, really see. You've spent your life hearing sin, but you never saw it, even when it happened in front of you." He approached the altar, laid something down, a cassette recorder, old, hissing. He pressed play, a voice, Mary's, sobbing. I saw what he did to her. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I thought Father Brown would handle it. The tape stopped. Mary stared at it, eyes wide. "I never recorded that," she whispered. "But you did say it," Michael said, "and he heard it, because he's always listening." Father Brown stood between them now. "You've made your point. Let her go." Michael tilted his head. "You still don't get it. You're not protecting her." He looked into Father Brown's eyes. "You're protecting yourself, because you saw it too." Father Brown said nothing, because he remembered, years ago, a girl, quiet, troubled, a parishioner. She had left town, disappeared. They said she moved, but he had seen her, one night, walking out of the vestry, eyes swollen, mouth silent. He'd asked her no questions, because the truth was already screaming. He simply turned away. Now, he spoke. "I know who you are." Michael smiled. "Of course you do. I know what you've done." Michael nodded. "And you know why." The candles flickered violently. The air grew colder. And then, silence. No footsteps, no attack, only a final note left on the altar, beside the recorder. "You are the last witness now. Confess, or be remembered for what you didn't do." The door creaked open again. No one was there. Father Brown sat alone in the pew and whispered, "I know who did it," then closed his eyes. Chapter 6. The Window That Betrayed Everything. The killer wasn't caught by mistake. He was caught because a single stained glass window showed something that no one was ever meant to see. Father Brown didn't speak for 22 seconds. He simply stared at the window, lit by the morning sun, and realized the thing he had prayed would never be true, was carved into colored glass, and had been all along. It was the window above the south transept, St. Joseph holding the infant Christ. It had been there since the chapel was built. Generations had passed under it without a second glance. But today, the light hit it differently. Today, it revealed something hidden, an addition no artist ever admitted to painting, etched within the blue robe of the saint, visible only at a certain hour and angle, was the unmistakable shape of a man's face. Not holy, not symbolic, not imagined, real, watching. And it wasn't Joseph's. It was a face Father Brown recognized. Face that should have never been there, because it belonged to someone who had died last year. At least, that's what the entire parish believed. He stood in silence, heart tightening. That window had been the background to 100 sermons, dozens of weddings, the whispered cries of grief and joy. And all that time, someone had hidden a confession in plain sight. Not words, a face, a clue, a betrayal. From inside the church. He stepped back, examining the stained glass border. The panels had been repaired 3 months ago after a lightning strike shattered the upper arch. The restoration had been handled quietly, donated by an anonymous benefactor, no questions were asked. No one looked too closely. And yet now, that act, so charitable, so unassuming, had become the turning point of the entire case. Father Brown walked to the church archives. The invoice for the stained glass repairs listed only the name of the artist, A. Calloway, a name he'd never seen before. Not local, not registered. And then he remembered. Calloway had been the surname of Henry Calloway, the recluse who died under suspicious circumstances last year. A man without family, without friends, whose funeral had no mourners, except for one. The artist who had insisted on delivering the eulogy. A woman who claimed to be no relation, but felt spiritually called to speak. Her name, Alice March, a name that meant nothing until Father Brown realized what else she'd been involved with. 3 years earlier, Alice March had painted the new crucifixion mural for St. Hildegard's parish in Devon. That mural had also been restored last year, and behind it, hidden for decades, had been found the body of a missing nun, buried into the plaster. Alice March had vanished before authorities could question her, and now her work had arrived in Kembleford under a different name, and on the south transept window of St. Joseph she had left Henry Calloway's face staring out forever. Father Brown knew now the window had not betrayed the killer. It had betrayed her. That night, he reviewed the security logs of the parish, what little there were. No cameras, just an old motion log connected to the rectory lights. One alert, 2:14 a.m., 2 weeks ago, movement near the south transept. No one had been inside at that hour, or so they thought. He returned to the chapel at the same time. The air felt wrong, still, but charged. He sat in the last pew and stared at the window. The face seemed different now, more defined, not artistic, observational. It wasn't a tribute, it was surveillance. And as the moonlight replaced the sun, the glass flickered, and something new appeared. Words, etched across the folds of the robe. I watched him die. Father Brown felt the weight in his chest again. Not fear, not guilt. Recognition. It wasn't just Henry's face in the window. It was Alice's confession. Left behind not for God, but for him. He knew what she was doing. She had found a way to place her guilt in sacred places, where no one would think to question it, where confessions became art, where art became camouflage. She was hiding her truths in God's house, and no one had seen it, except now. The next morning, Father Brown requested all stained glass records from diocesan restoration, and he found her again, not just Kembleford, but Littleford, Durnley, Weston. Each time, a quiet repair, a signature, a hidden message. Each time, a death, and each time, someone was buried without investigation. He called Constable Neville, showed him the face, the records, the pattern, but when Neville tried to trace the address from the last invoice, it didn't exist. Alice March had never stayed in one place. She moved through churches, like a whisper of judgment, and now she was here. He knew what he had to do. He stood at the altar and announced to the parish that the south transept window would be removed for re-blessing. By nightfall, word had spread. He waited. At 2:14 a.m., the rectory lights flickered again. He stood behind the organ pipes, watching. A figure emerged, shrouded, hooded. She approached the window slowly, hands trembling. Then she pulled out a cloth and began to wipe it clean. But not the glass, the hidden writing. She was erasing her confession. He stepped forward. Alice, she froze, turned, and in the faint light, he saw her face. Calm, determined, but tired. Very, very tired. You saw it, she said. He nodded. I thought maybe this one would stay hidden. He stepped closer. Why do it? Why here? She looked at the glass. Because it's the one place people still believe what they see. She held something in her hand. A photograph. Henry Calloway. Unmarked. Still alive. Taken 2 weeks after his reported death. She placed it at the altar and whispered, I didn't kill him, but I buried him. Father Brown stared at her. Why? Because someone had to. She stepped back into the shadows. I know who did it, she whispered, and vanished into the night. The next morning, the window was gone, but in its place was something no one noticed right away. An inscription, tiny, etched at the base of the frame. He was innocent, but not blameless, and beneath it, forgive me, for I saw everything. That night, Father Brown sat alone in the dark and whispered, I know who did it. And after a long silence, added, Chapter 7. What Father Brown didn't expect. The dead man walked into Father Brown's confessional and asked for absolution, not metaphorically, not in memory, but in flesh, living, breathing, and with the same unmistakable voice that had been stilled by a bullet 6 months ago. Father Brown's throat dried. He didn't respond at first. He simply sat in the dark and stared through the wooden grill into eyes he had seen closed in a coffin. Robert Trellis, buried by the parish, mourned by 3, and supposedly shot in the head in his own study. But now, here he was, with that same casual drawl, that same scar above his right brow, and the same uncanny smirk beneath words that sounded like regret. Forgive me, Father, for I've done it again. Father Brown said nothing. He couldn't. His hands had instinctively clutched the arms of the wooden chair, nails digging into the old varnish. Trellis leaned forward. You saw it, didn't you? My death. The picture in the paper. It was a good performance, wasn't it? Then he chuckled, softly, sinister, and before Father Brown could even whisper a word, Trellis added, I only came back to see if you'd still look me in the eye, or finally look away. The door to the confessional opened again, but Trellis never left. He had vanished, not walked out, not fled, vanished. Father Brown emerged slowly, the breath returning to his lungs in gasps. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder. No one had entered the chapel. No one had seen anything. But a note had been left behind, folded neatly in the center pew. It read, Your mistake was thinking it ended when the casket closed. He sat there until dawn. What followed was a week of unraveling that no prayer could quiet. The death of Robert Trellis had always been uneasy. Officially, a suicide. Unofficially, an execution. Father Brown had asked questions even then. Why the door was locked from the inside. Why the bullet had no exit wound. Why the suicide note had no fingerprints. But the case was closed. The family uninterested. The constable unconcerned. And Father Brown, worn from grief and deception, had finally let it go. But he hadn't forgotten. And now the man was back, or someone who wore his face. The next morning, Mary Dunlow found a single black feather in the chapel's holy water font. No birds had entered, no doors had opened. But the feather was there, and attached to it, by a piece of crimson thread, a photograph, taken from above, from the bell tower, of Father Brown, In the confessional, last night, captioned in ink. You didn't expect to be watched too, did you? He brought the photograph to Constable Neville, who stared at it in silence for several minutes before asking a single question. Do you think he faked his death, or never died at all? Father Brown didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because he had started to fear the answer would unravel more than just the Trellis case. It would unravel the parish itself. He returned to the grave. Robert Trellis had been buried in a small corner of the churchyard, just beyond the eastern row. His grave was simple, plain stone, no inscription beyond the name and year. But when Father Brown arrived that afternoon, something had changed. The earth had been disturbed, not dug up, pressed down, as if someone had been standing there for a long time, waiting. A single daffodil lay across the top, and next to it, a bullet casing, wrapped in parchment. The parchment read, "The first death was not the last. The real confession is still hidden." He looked around. No footsteps, no watcher, only the wind, brushing the grass like fingers over secrets. Back in the rectory, he reopened his case notes and found a page he had never written, a list of names, underlined in red. Each name connected to Robert Trellis by proximity, gossip, or guilt. One name stood out, Graham Lively, the man who had testified that Trellis was depressed, who said he'd heard Trellis talk of ending it all, who insisted Trellis had spoken to him the night before about hearing voices in the dark. Father Brown remembered now. He had never seen them speak once. That night, he visited Lively's home. No one answered. The door was unlocked. Inside, the radio played white noise on repeat. And on the dining table, 3 photographs, all of Father Brown. Lively was dead. In the bathtub, no blood, no water, just a mirror on the wall across from him, and on it, scrawled in condensation, "He didn't expect me either." The coroner ruled it a stroke, but Father Brown knew better. It was a message. He returned to the chapel, lit every candle he had, and sat in the pew for hours. The silence grew unbearable, and then the voice returned, from nowhere, but inside him. Would you still forgive him? If he forgave you first? It wasn't Trellis. It wasn't God. It was the part of him that had started to believe he deserved this. He whispered back, "What did I miss?" And the candles all went out. In the darkness, a shape stood in the pulpit. Not a man, a silhouette, smiling, holding a confessional stole, then disappearing, leaving only a page torn from the missal, circled in ink. "What you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven." He didn't sleep that night. He spent it trying to remember what he had said to Trellis during their final conversation. Had he dismissed his fears? Had he misread his sorrow? Had he looked away when he should have stared straight through? The next morning, another name appeared on the chapel wall, written in chalk, James Derry. He hadn't heard that name in years. A boy from the seminary, expelled for a violent outburst, later arrested for stalking, then vanished. But he remembered now. James had once been obsessed with Father Brown, always watching him, always quoting scripture back to him in ways that felt wrong. He went to the diocesan records, found James's last known location, a monastery near the coast, disbanded 5 years ago, and closed after one of the monks was found dead, face down, with his lips sewn shut. Father Brown traced every thread, every name, every letter James Derry had ever sent. They all ended with the same words, "What you did not say will one day rise louder than what you did. That night, the bells rang at 3 a.m. A note pinned to the chapel door. Final, absolute. The real death happens when the priest forgets he's not the only one who listens. He opened the chapel doors, stepped inside, and found every pew filled with photos. Not of Trellis, not of the others, but of him. Praying, walking, writing, thinking, always unaware. And in the final image, his own eyes looking at the camera, as if he had become the watched. As if he was the next confession, he sat down in the front pew, alone, and whispered, "I know who did it," then closed his eyes, and after a long silence. Chapter 8. A silent witness saw everything. No one believed the statue could see, but the moment it blinked, Father Brown knew the truth was far darker than he ever imagined. The garden outside the rectory was quiet, drenched in the heavy mist of early morning, and there, nestled beneath the gnarled branches of the old yew tree, stood a weathered stone figure of an angel. For years it had been nothing more than decoration, silent, immobile, forgotten. But today Father Brown had glimpsed something impossible, a subtle movement in the statue's eyes, a flicker, a breath, a silent witness watching him. He reached out instinctively, but his hands stopped inches from the cold stone. The angel's gaze was fixed, unblinking, yet somehow alive. It was as if the figure had seen every secret, every sin, every whispered prayer and unspoken betrayal that had passed beneath it, and it had been waiting, watching. Father Brown stepped back, heart pounding. He had come to the garden seeking answers, a break in the suffocating fog of mystery that had wrapped the parish like a shroud since Catherine Morley's disappearance. But what he found, instead, was a reminder that some truths were not meant to be uncovered, that even in stillness there are eyes that see all. The first clue was a series of footprints around the statue, small, precise, and human. No gardener's tracks, no animal prints, just the imprint of someone who had knelt there in the dead of night, careful not to disturb a single leaf, but desperate to leave a message. Father Brown knelt beside the angel and found it, a thin strip of parchment, curled and worn, tucked beneath the statue's base. He unfurled it slowly. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, but the words burned into his mind. I saw everything. I heard the silence. The truth is buried where the light never reaches. He read the sentence twice, then 3 times. Who had written it? And what had they seen? Back inside the rectory, he cross-referenced the parchment with the missing confessionals, the ones never recorded, the ones removed from the registry. Each disappearance was tied to a single name, Edith Lawton, the village schoolteacher, a woman quiet and unassuming, whose presence was almost invisible, yet who had taught generations of children without complaint or fanfare. But Edith had vanished weeks before Catherine. No note, no farewell, no trace. Father Brown felt a cold chill. What if Edith had been the silent witness? What if she had seen something so terrible that silence was her only refuge? He summoned Mary Dunlow and asked about Edith's last days. Mary hesitated. She was frightened, Father. Said someone was watching her. Said she couldn't speak of what she knew. But she never came to the church for confession. No. That's what's strange. She was a devout woman. She always did. The plot thickened. If Edith had been too afraid to confess, What could be so dangerous? Father Brown returned to the garden that evening. The statue's eyes seemed to glisten under the moonlight, casting eerie shadows that danced with the rustling leaves. He traced the angel's wings with trembling fingers and noticed a small engraving, a code. Letters intertwined with numbers. 3-7-12. It was a puzzle, a map, or a warning. He jotted the sequence down and looked towards the parish archives. For hours, he sifted through old maps and documents until he found it. A ledger from 1937, page 12, detailing the construction of an underground crypt beneath the church. Long forgotten, sealed, unvisited. The revelation shook him. Could Edith's message point there? The next day, Father Brown enlisted Constable Neville to open the sealed crypt. The air inside was damp and thick with decay. The faint smell of incense lingered as they descended narrow stone steps. In the darkness, the beam of Father Brown's lantern revealed rows of alcoves, each holding a name etched in fading script. And then he saw it, a small wooden box tucked into a corner, its surface carved with the same cryptic numbers from the angel's engraving. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a diary, its leather cracked and brittle. The handwriting was frantic, desperate. It belonged to Edith Lawton. The pages spoke of secrets too dark to share aloud, names whispered in the shadows, meetings held under cover of night, threats veiled as warnings. Most chilling was a passage describing a figure, unseen but ever present, who watched from the shadows, who knew every move, every word, every lie. Edith wrote, "He is not man nor ghost, but something worse. He watches without eyes, hears without ears, waits without breath. I fear I am the last to know. If I disappear, know that I saw everything." Father Brown's hands trembled. The weight of her words pressed down like a leaden cloak. If Edith was the silent witness, then who or what had watched her? He felt the cold breath of realization. Not all witnesses are human. The crypt's silence deepened, as if the very stones listened. That night, Father Brown could not sleep. The angel's eyes haunted his dreams, following him through corridors dark and endless. In the morning, a message awaited him on his desk. A single sheet of paper, folded and stained, written in the same shaky hand as the parchment. "You think you watch from afar, but I am closer than your shadow." Below it, a drawing, a child's sketch, a figure standing behind the angel, invisible to most, watching. Father Brown knew then that the silent witness was not just a metaphor. It was reality, a presence that had recorded every secret, every sin, every hidden truth, waiting for the moment to reveal what no one dared to say aloud. As the sun rose over the parish, he stood once more beneath the yew tree, staring into the angel's lifeless eyes, and whispered, "I know who did it." But the truth would never be told. Chapter 9. The truth watched him back. He thought he was the one watching, but the truth had been watching him all along, and it never blinked. Father Brown's eyes snapped open in the darkness, heart pounding not from fear, but from the weight of a revelation too heavy to bear. The quiet of the rectory was shattered by the sensation of being seen, unseen, yet undeniably present. The shadows in the room seemed to thicken, the air itself pulsating with an unseen gaze that bore into his soul. It was no longer he who observed the world's secrets. It was the world, the truth itself, staring back at him, and the eyes did not waver. He sat up, hands clutching the worn wooden cross on his bedside table, and whispered, "I have been blind." The confession was not just to God, it was to himself, to the silence that had watched him miss what was always in plain sight. Days earlier, the mystery had felt solvable. A tangled web of lies, concealed motives, and veiled sins that Father Brown had believed he could unravel. But now, with this haunting awareness, everything twisted into a labyrinth without exits. The missing bodies, the confessions never heard, the messages hidden in shadows. It was as if the whole parish was a stage, and he, the unwilling actor, had been dancing to a script written long before his arrival. The problem began when a faded photograph surfaced, slipped anonymously beneath the chapel door. It was a picture of Father Brown himself, standing, alone at dusk in the graveyard, back turned to the camera. On the back, a single sentence was scrawled in hurried, desperate ink. "The watcher has become the watched." That was the first sign the case was no longer just about others. It was about him. Father Brown revisited the places he had once believed sacred, the chapel, the graveyard, the silent vestry, and found evidence that was both confounding and chilling. In the chapel's confessional, he discovered a hidden panel behind the woodwork. Inside, a bundle of letters, all unsigned, all addressed to him. The words were accusatory and cryptic, filled with intimate knowledge of his past failings and secrets no one else could have known. Each letter ended with the same chilling phrase, "I see you, Father." And so does the truth. He reached out to Constable Neville, but even the lawman was uneasy, disturbed by the way the case now seemed to infiltrate their own lives. No one was safe from this watchful presence. The constable confessed, voice barely a whisper, "I think the parish itself is haunted, not by spirits, but by secrets that refuse to stay buried." Digging deeper, Father Brown uncovered a series of confessions recorded but never logged. People who had whispered their darkest deeds into the confessional booth, only for their words to vanish without record. Among them was a chilling reference to an entity called the Silent Witness, described as ever-present and never forgiving. Father Brown's investigation led him to an abandoned bell tower. The stairs were creaking beneath his feet, the air thick with dust and forgotten prayers. At the top, the wind howled through shattered glass, and on the cracked window pane, faint fingerprints glimmered in the moonlight. They were fresh. They traced the shape of eyes, two dark circles staring outward. A presence was here, not corporeal, not human, watching. He fled the tower and found himself at the grave of Catherine Morley. The ground was disturbed again, but this time something more grotesque awaited him. A diary, half buried in mud, opened to a page smeared with tears and blood. The last entry read, "He watches, always, and I am nothing but the shadow in his eyes." Father Brown realized then that Catherine had understood the truth far better than he ever could. Returning to the rectory, he found the chapel in chaos. Candles were toppled, books scattered, and upon the altar, a mirror, cracked but still reflecting his weary face. Written in the dust on the glass was a question. What do you see when the truth watches you? His breath caught. The mirror was no longer just a reflection. It was a judge. The final blow came when Father Brown returned to his study to find the missing pages of his diary laid out on the floor. Each page bore a new confession, one he had never made, words of doubt, guilt, and fear. They were his secrets, exposed by someone who knew not just his actions, but his very soul. He looked up, eyes meeting his own, in the reflection of a polished crucifix. The truth was not outside him, it was within, and it was watching. He sank to his knees and whispered, "I know who did it." But the silence that answered was heavier than any confession. Chapter 10. Father Brown's eyes never blinked. He never blinked once. Not when the killer stared him down. Not when the entire truth crashed down. And not when everything he believed shattered like glass beneath a silent storm. Father Brown stood alone, in the dim light of the chapel, eyes locked on the stained glass window above the altar, where dawn's first light fractured into shards of color. But his gaze was not on the window. It was on the darkness behind it, on something unseen, unyielding, watching him back. The killer had come close enough to look him in the eye, and yet Father Brown's eyes never betrayed a flicker of fear or doubt. They remained fixed, steady, like the eye of a tempest that sees all but refuses to waver. The case had begun innocuously, as many do. A whispered rumor of strange figures seen at night, shadows slipping between the tombstones, and an inexplicable unease settling over the parish. Then came the first death. Quiet, almost peaceful, but marked by a coldness no natural passing could explain. Catherine Morley's disappearance had spiraled into murder, secrets, and unseen watchers. But none of it prepared Father Brown for the chilling realization that he was not merely an observer. He was the target. When the killer had revealed himself, not with violence, but with a simple, chilling gaze, Father Brown had felt the full weight of what it meant. To be watched is to be known. To be known is to be vulnerable. Yet he did not blink, because to blink is to give in. He recalled the day the letter arrived. No return address, no signature, just a single line scrawled in crimson ink. "I see you watching. Now I watch you." Inside the envelope was a photograph, grainy and hastily torn. It showed Father Brown, from across the village green, standing by the old well. His face was calm, unreadable, eyes fixed on something beyond the frame. But what struck him most was the shadow in the background, an indistinct figure, just at the edge of vision, standing perfectly still. A silent witness. Days passed, and more messages arrived, each more cryptic and unsettling than the last. Footprints circled the churchyard at night. Candles were found, melted into strange shapes, symbols that no parishioner recognized, and always the feeling of unseen eyes tracking his every move. His investigations led him deeper into the parish's buried history, a tale of betrayal, guilt, and long-forgotten sins. He unearthed records of confessions erased, testimonies silenced, and people whose fates were sealed by secrets never meant to be uncovered. Yet the deeper he delved, the more the lines between hunter and hunted blurred. One evening, Father Brown found himself at the old bell tower, where the air was thick with the scent of rain and moss. He noticed fresh scratches on the wooden door, deliberate marks, not from age or weather, but from a blade. Inside, the bell swung gently, though no breeze stirred. The room was empty, yet the silence was heavy, pregnant with something waiting. On the floor lay a small, intricately carved box. Inside was a single glass eye, unnervingly lifelike, staring blankly upward. Beneath it, a note. "Your eyes never blinked, but mine never closed." The message was clear. The watcher was watching the watcher. Father Brown's breath caught. Who was this figure who never blinked, who had seen everything from the shadows and now stepped into the light? That night, The chapel's silence was shattered by a sound like whispered prayers. Father Brown followed it to the vestry, where he discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside lay a journal bound in cracked leather. Its pages detailed the life of a man obsessed with surveillance, not of sinners seeking confession, but of those who dared to watch. The last entry was a chilling confession. To see without blinking is to accept the darkness. To be seen is to invite the void. The following day, Father Brown confronted the last remaining suspect, a figure cloaked in secrets and silence. Their conversation was a battle of eyes, unspoken truths, and veiled threats. The killer revealed not rage, but sorrow, a twisted sense of justice, enacted with cold precision. In the final moments, Father Brown realized the true horror. The killer had mirrored him. Both were watchers. Both had seen too much, but only one refused to blink. As the dawn broke over the village, Father Brown stood alone once more. The church bells tolled, but his gaze remained steady, unwavering. He whispered into the empty air, "I know who did it." Then, eyes unblinking, he faced the unknown and said, "But the truth will never be told." Chapter 11. He missed one crucial detail. He had pieced together every clue, followed every shadow, and unraveled every lie. But in the end, Father Brown missed one crucial detail that would change everything. It began with the discovery of a torn page from an old ledger, found carefully folded beneath the altar stone. The ink was faded, the handwriting almost illegible, but the message was clear. The unseen hand guides the witness, but the blinded eye cannot see. Father Brown read it twice, feeling the cold grip of realization tighten around his heart. He had been the witness, the observer, the seeker of truth, and yet somehow he had been blinded to what was hiding in plain sight. The case itself had grown more complex with each passing day. Murders that seemed unrelated formed a pattern only he could trace, a thread of darkness weaving through the quiet parish. He had interrogated suspects, examined crime scenes, and decoded cryptic messages left in the margins of prayer books. But as the tapestry of the mystery grew denser, so did the shadows obscuring its heart. One by one, Father Brown eliminated suspects, yet the murders continued. Each death was more precise, more chilling than the last. The killer moved unseen, slipping through the cracks of faith and doubt. And with every step, Father Brown felt the weight of a growing doubt. Was he hunting a ghost, or had he been hunting himself all along? The moment of reckoning came when Father Brown revisited the confession booth, the place where so many had whispered their darkest secrets, yet where so many confessions had vanished without trace. Behind the wooden panel, he found a hidden compartment containing a diary bound in cracked leather. The entries were fragmented, disjointed, but one phrase repeated like a haunting refrain. He watches, but misses. As Father Brown read on, he uncovered a shocking revelation. Someone close to him had been manipulating the investigation from the shadows, feeding him false leads and steering him away from the truth. The betrayal was not just personal, it was spiritual. The sins of the past had cast long shadows, and now they threatened to consume everything. The diary also revealed the killer's twisted motive, a desire not just to kill, but to punish those who refused to see, who turned blind eyes to injustice and suffering. The murders were a grim sermon, delivered in blood and silence. With this knowledge, Father Brown confronted the final piece of the puzzle, a photograph tucked into the diary's last pages. It showed a figure standing beside him during a night of vigil, face obscured but hands unmistakably familiar. The killer had been watching him all along, close enough to touch, close enough to betray. In the final confrontation, Father Brown faced the one who had deceived him, a figure cloaked in righteousness and deceit. Their exchange was not just of words, but of souls laid bare. The killer confessed, not with remorse, but with a chilling conviction that justice demanded this terrible price. But even as the truth emerged, Father Brown realized the horror of what he had missed, a simple, almost insignificant detail overlooked in his rush to find answers. It was this omission that had allowed the killer to slip through his grasp, to remain a shadow among the light. As dawn broke over the parish, Father Brown stood alone in the chapel, the weight of failure heavy on his shoulders. He whispered to the empty pews, "I know who did it." But the silence that answered was filled with the echo of what he had missed. Chapter 12. Someone watched Father Brown first. He never saw who watched him, until the moment he realized he had been the one under the lens all along. The letter arrived without warning, slipped beneath the chapel door in the dead of night. No stamp, no sender, just a single phrase scrawled in shaky ink. "You think you watched first, but you were never alone." Father Brown stared at those words as dawn crept through the stained glass, each beam fracturing into 1,000 shards of doubt. He felt the slow sinking of certainty, the realization that every step he took had been anticipated, every move observed. The watcher was always one step ahead, and the watcher was no stranger. It had been watching him first. The mystery that had consumed months, the murders, the hidden messages, the silent witnesses, collapsed inward. Father Brown found himself questioning not only who the killer was, but who among those he trusted was watching him. His own reflection seemed alien, a man ensnared in a web far more tangled than he'd ever imagined. He began with his own quarters, every window, every mirror, every crevice scrutinized for signs of intrusion, hidden cameras, secret compartments, but nothing visible. Yet the feeling remained, an invisible presence just beyond perception. Then came the discovery of a small, nearly imperceptible scratch on the back of his confessional grill. It was a mark, a symbol carved in haste, a cross within a circle, a warning or a signature. The deeper Father Brown dug, the more the boundaries between observer and observed blurred. He uncovered a series of confessions, whispered words recorded but never reported, recounting sins of betrayal, deceit, and murder. The confessions alluded to someone watching not just the parishioners, but the very shepherd, meant to guide them. One name emerged repeatedly, Amelia Clark, a woman thought dead for years, whose shadow haunted the rectory halls long before Father Brown's arrival. Records showed her death was ruled accidental, but whispers suggested otherwise. Could she be the watcher who had turned the eye upon the watcher? Father Brown's suspicions grew when he received a second letter, this time with a photograph tucked inside. It showed him asleep in his study, the curtains drawn tight, a candle flickering on the desk. Someone had been inside, close enough to capture the intimate moment. The caption below read, "Sleep is the only time. You are truly unguarded." Haunted by the invasion, Father Brown enlisted Constable Neville's help. Their search yielded no intruders, but unearthed something far worse, a diary hidden behind a loose brick in the chapel wall. The pages chronicled a silent observer's watchful gaze, detailing Father Brown's routines, his prayers, his doubts. The watcher was closer than he feared, closer than a shadow, more intimate than breath. The tension mounted as Father Brown realized that every clue he had followed, every red herring he chased, was part of a larger design. The killer was not just evading him, the killer was engaging him, playing a game where Father Brown was the prize. In the final act, Father Brown confronted the ultimate truth. The watcher was not an outsider. It was someone who had been by his side. In every sermon, every confession, every whispered counsel, someone who knew his thoughts before he voiced them, who predicted his actions before he took them. A friend, a confidant, a betrayer. As he stood in the silent chapel, the weight of betrayal crushing his spirit, Father Brown whispered into the void, "I know who did it." But the answer was a question that shattered everything. Had I been watching myself all along? And in that fractured silence, he added, "But the truth will never be told."